Sometimes the quiet between you and this person feels so strange, so weighted, that it almost feels like something is being said without a single sound. And if you're here right now, there's a reason for that. Because whether you're ready to admit it or not, somewhere deep inside you've been sensing something unusual, as though this person has been trying to reach you emotionally, even without ever saying a word out loud, and what you're about to hear may explain exactly why that feeling exists. 3 things they may never say to your face directly, and the second one may completely change how you see everything happening between you. The first truth is this: they think about you far more than you realize. Not occasionally, not in some passing, casual way, but far more deeply than they're even willing to admit to themselves. And I know part of you might resist that idea immediately. You might think, if that were really true, why are they so distant? Why the silence? Why haven't they reached out? But that very question actually reveals something important. Most people assume love always creates movement, that if someone truly feels something, they naturally move closer. But human psychology doesn't work in such a straight line. Sometimes deep feeling pulls a person toward you, and sometimes that same depth pushes them into retreat instead. Here's what most people never fully grasp. When someone feels emotionally overwhelmed by a connection they can't fully control, distance becomes their coping mechanism. They pull back, not because there's nothing there, but because there's too much there. They grow quieter, not because they've stopped caring, but because caring itself has become dangerous. Dangerous to their emotional stability, dangerous to the image they've spent years building of themselves, dangerous to the walls they've carefully constructed over time. And if this person carries old wounds around vulnerability, abandonment, rejection, or emotional dependence, your presence may be activating all of that at once. That's exactly why this first truth matters so much, because this person's silence might not be emptiness at all. It might actually be emotional overload. There are people who express love with ease, and then there are people whose nervous systems interpret emotional closeness as a loss of control. They feel attachment and instantly experience fear alongside it. They want connection and simultaneously feel the urge to run in the opposite direction. This contradiction is confusing for whoever's on the receiving end of it, especially someone like you, someone emotionally intuitive enough to sense when something deeper is happening beneath the surface. And this is exactly where things get complicated, because you aren't imagining that energy. You aren't being overly sensitive. You aren't manufacturing meaning out of nothing. If you've repeatedly felt their presence in your mind, if you keep picking up emotional waves from them during quiet moments, if you feel like something unfinished still exists between the two of you, there's likely a real reason behind that. Maybe you notice them showing up in strange moments. A memory surfaces out of nowhere. You feel them late at night, and you find yourself asking, why now? But maybe the more useful question isn't why you were thinking of them. Maybe it's what's happening inside them that keeps pulling your awareness back toward them in the first place. Because emotional bonds don't simply vanish just because communication has stopped. Sometimes silence actually preserves intensity instead of dissolving it. And that leads us deeper into this first truth. They may be fighting an internal battle you can't see at all. On the outside, they might look composed, distant, even indifferent, but internally, they may be replaying your interactions far more than you'd ever guess. Certain words you said might still be echoing inside them. Certain moments might still carry real emotional weight. Something about you may have reached a part of them they'd kept hidden for years. And that's precisely what frightened them, because genuine connection doesn't just feel romantic. It exposes everything left unresolved. Real connection is rarely comfortable at first, especially for people who've survived through emotional self-protection. When someone like that encounters a person who can see straight through their mask, something unusual happens inside them. They feel relief and panic simultaneously. Relief, because finally someone sees them beyond the performance. Panic, because now hiding doesn't come as easily anymore. And if you naturally perceive emotional truth in others, This person likely felt exposed in your presence without fully understanding why. But that's still not the entire reason their silence feels so heavy. Something deeper is unfolding beneath that silence. This is where the psychology gets even more revealing. Sometimes a person doesn't pull away because they don't care. They pull away because caring forces them to confront who they've actually become. Your presence may have turned into a kind of mirror for them, and mirrors can be terrifying. They reveal longing, regret, emotional immaturity, unhealed wounds, the version of themselves they abandoned a long time ago. In Jungian terms, this is often referred to as shadow activation, the meeting with parts of the self a person buried because those parts felt too unsafe to own, and you may have unintentionally awakened exactly that in them. Maybe your warmth reminded them of just how emotionally numb they'd become. Maybe your sincerity exposed how much they'd been performing strength while quietly hiding loneliness underneath it. Maybe your emotional depth confronted their habit of staying emotionally unavailable to everyone around them. Whatever the exact pattern, something inside them shifted because of you. And once someone has genuinely seen their own emotional truth, pretending it isn't there becomes so much harder to keep up. This naturally flows into the second layer of this first truth, something painful but genuinely important. They miss you, not necessarily in the obvious way people usually imagine missing someone. Missing someone doesn't always look like dramatic tears or obsessive messaging. Sometimes missing someone looks like emotional irritability, restlessness, strange shifts in mood, a sudden loss of focus, difficulty staying fully present with the people around them. They might constantly distract themselves because stillness brings you right back into their awareness. They might bury themselves in work, routine, obligations, or other relationships entirely. And yet something remains emotionally unfinished for them regardless. But here's the paradox in all of it. The more they miss you, the harder they might actually fight against that feeling, because longing creates vulnerability, and vulnerability threatens their sense of control. So instead of moving toward you, they might become even more rigid, more silent, more confusing, more emotionally contradictory than before. And from where you're standing, that contradiction hurts deeply, because inconsistency can wound far more than a clean absence ever could. A clear goodbye hurts, sure, but emotional ambiguity is the kind of thing that can haunt a soul for a long time, especially when your intuition keeps quietly whispering, "There's more here." And that brings us to the second truth, the one that might genuinely surprise you. Because if the first truth was about hidden longing, this second one is about the actual reason behind their behavior, and it runs far more intense than you might think. The second truth is this: they're afraid of how much power you actually hold over their emotional world. Let that really sink in for a second. Not power in a manipulative sense, not control exactly, something much deeper than that. You affect them emotionally in ways they can't easily manage or regulate. Your absence shifts their internal state. Your presence alters their emotional rhythm entirely. Your words stay with them long after they're spoken. Your energy genuinely impacts them, and that terrifies them. Why? Because a lot of people build entire identities around self-sufficiency, around emotional control, around needing absolutely no one, around never being the vulnerable one in the room. Then someone comes along, and suddenly that carefully constructed identity starts to crack. They start checking their phone more often. Their thoughts shift in ways they don't expect. They feel anticipation. They feel disappointment. They feel a kind of emotional dependence they never actually planned for. And if this person has spent years actively avoiding emotional surrender, you may represent the exact experience they fear the most. Being affected, being moved, being changed, being unable to stay untouched by someone else's presence. And here's the shocking part. They may actually resent how deeply they feel for you. Yes, love and resistance really can coexist inside the same person. Longing and ego can coexist. Desire and fear can coexist right alongside each other. This is exactly why they might send you mixed signals. One moment warmth, the next moment distance. One moment emotionally open, the next moment completely withdrawn. It feels confusing because you naturally assume behavior should match feeling. But with emotionally conflicted people, behavior often reflects their defense mechanisms, not their actual truth. Defense says, pull away. Truth says, stay. Defense says, don't need them. Truth says, I already do. And this internal war can become genuinely exhausting for them to carry. Carl Jung once emphasized that whatever we resist internally often ends up gaining more power over us. The more someone suppresses a genuine feeling, the more intensely that feeling tends to operate through the unconscious instead. That means even if this person is avoiding you physically, they may be emotionally more attached than ever before. Their resistance doesn't erase the bond at all. Sometimes it actually strengthens it into something closer to obsession. But something even more surprising might be happening too. And if this describes your connection, you've probably already felt it. They may be testing whether you'll keep chasing them, not always consciously. Often, this happens completely unconsciously. This tends to occur when someone fears abandonment, but also fears real intimacy at the same time. They create distance and then quietly watch. Will you leave? Will you fight for this? Will you prove your devotion? Will you fall apart emotionally? Will you still choose them even if they become difficult to deal with? This behavior can look cold from the outside, but underneath it often comes from attachment wounds formed long before you ever entered their life. That doesn't excuse hurtful behavior, but it does explain the pattern behind it. And if you've been the one overgiving, overweighting, over-explaining yourself, something important may have recently shifted. Maybe you got quieter, maybe you stopped chasing them, maybe you started protecting your own energy for once. Maybe for the first time you actually stepped back emotionally. And if that happened, everything inside them may have changed too, because now they can no longer count on your predictable emotional availability. Now they feel uncertainty. Now they feel loss. Now they're finally feeling something close to what you've been feeling all along. And this might be the real shock in all of it. The moment you stopped energetically chasing them may have been the exact moment they truly felt your absence for the first time, because pursuit can actually hide the truth. As long as someone knows you'll remain available no matter what happens, they can keep delaying emotional accountability indefinitely. But the moment your energy shifts, the moment your silence becomes real, the moment your attention is no longer a guarantee, something primal wakes up inside them. Fear, regret, urgency, and suddenly the entire emotional power dynamic between you shifts. They start wondering, are you done? Are you moving on? Have they already lost you? Will there even be another chance? But something deeper still lies underneath this second truth, something most people never really talk about. Their greatest fear may not actually be losing you. Their greatest fear may be what happens if they truly let themselves love you completely. Because real love changes identity. It dismantles defenses. It demands honesty. It asks for surrender. And surrender can feel like death to the ego. That's exactly why some people run the moment love starts becoming real, not because love is weak, but because it's powerful enough to destroy false versions of who they've built themselves to be. And this person may be standing at that exact threshold right now. Part of them wants to step forward. Part of them wants to disappear entirely. Part of them wants to confess everything. Part of them wants to bury it all forever. And the third truth reveals which side is beginning to win. But before that fully comes into focus, you need to understand one final psychological shift currently happening inside them. Because recently, something changed. Something they've been suppressing is becoming impossible to keep ignoring. And that shift is pushing them toward a decision they may not be able to avoid much longer, because the human heart can only suppress truth for so long before the body, the mind, and the unconscious all start rebelling against the lie. What they pushed down is rising back up. What they avoided is returning. What they denied is now demanding recognition. And this is exactly where the third truth begins. The third truth is this. They can no longer pretend this connection means nothing. For a long time, they may have tried to rationalize the whole thing. They may have told themselves it was temporary. They may have minimized the emotional intensity of it. They may have labeled it attraction, curiosity, coincidence, nostalgia, loneliness, anything except what it actually felt like, because naming something makes it real. And once something becomes real, it asks something of you. It asks for responsibility. It asks for truth. It asks for courage. And courage is exactly where so many people struggle, especially those who learned early on that emotional openness leads to pain. Especially those who built their entire survival strategy around emotional control. Especially those who were once deeply hurt and made a silent, private promise to themselves. Never again. But here's what they didn't expect. They didn't expect you to stay in their inner world for this long. They didn't expect your energy to keep returning again and again. They didn't expect that even after silence, even after distance, even after trying so hard to focus on other things, something about you would remain emotionally alive inside them regardless. That's just the nature of real emotional bonds. They don't always obey logic. You can't force yourself to stop feeling something simply because feeling it has become inconvenient. You can't command your own heart to go numb once something meaningful has already rooted itself deep in the psyche. And this is exactly where everything becomes impossible for them to keep ignoring, because lately they may be experiencing something unusual. Your absence is no longer bringing them relief. It's creating an ache instead. At first, distance probably felt safer to them. Distance gave them space. Space gave them the illusion of control. They may have genuinely believed that with enough time, enough silence, enough distraction, these feelings would eventually weaken, that the emotional charge would fade, that they'd regain their old sense of balance. But the opposite may have happened instead. Instead of disappearing, you got louder inside them. Instead of fading, the emotional imprint deepened further. Instead of freedom, they felt empty. And that realization changes people, because denial only works while there's still hope that avoidance will fix the problem. Once avoidance stops working, the truth becomes so much harder to escape, and that may be exactly where they find themselves right now. They may be noticing your absence in places they never expected to feel it, in small routines, in quiet evenings, in the pauses between tasks, in the moments when the external noise stops and inner truth gets louder than everything else. They may catch themselves replaying things they once brushed off, remembering details they pretended to forget, wondering what you're feeling now, wondering if you still think about them, wondering if they still matter to you at all. And here's something genuinely important to understand. Sometimes the moment someone truly realizes your value isn't when you're giving them everything you have. It's the moment your emotional presence is no longer freely available to them. Not because love is some kind of game and not because distance should ever be used as a weapon, but because absence removes emotional numbness. It reveals the truth underneath. When your warmth is constantly available, some people unconsciously take that emotional safety for granted. But the moment that warmth withdraws, they finally feel the emotional climate shift. They feel the cold. They feel the emptiness. They feel exactly what your presence had been quietly giving them all along. And now they know it. They know your presence mattered far more than they ever admitted out loud. They know your energy touched them more deeply than they ever confessed. They know that losing this connection wouldn't feel neutral at all. It would genuinely hurt. But here's what becomes emotionally heartbreaking in all of this. Even after realizing all of that, they may still hesitate. And you might find yourself wondering why. If they feel all of this so intensely, why not just come forward and say so? Because realization is not the same thing as transformation. Feeling something deeply is not the same thing as having the courage to act on it. Knowing a truth is not the same thing as living by it. This is the painful middle ground, the place where love genuinely exists. But fear is still fighting hard for control. And this is exactly where the deepest inner conflict lives. One part of them is exhausted from resisting, another part is terrified of surrendering entirely. One side of them whispers, reach out, say it, stop hiding. The other side whispers, protect yourself, stay guarded, don't risk rejection again. And if this person carries shame, regret, or guilt around any of this, that internal conflict becomes even heavier because now another question enters the picture entirely. What if it's already too late? This question alone can haunt a person relentlessly. What if they waited too long? What if you're already tired of waiting? What if you no longer trust them the way you used to? What if their silence wounded you beyond any real repair? What if the chance they once had is simply gone now? And this is exactly where regret becomes so powerful. Regret isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it lives quietly in the chest, a kind of pressure, a heaviness, a repeated thought that keeps returning late at night, a quiet knowing that they had something meaningful and let fear get in the way of it. Many people can live with heartbreak. What becomes much harder to live with is self-betrayal, knowing love showed up and they ran from it anyway, knowing truth arrived and they hid from it anyway, knowing their heart spoke clearly and their ego silenced it regardless. This creates real psychological suffering because the soul is always moving toward wholeness, and wholeness requires truth to get there. Jung believed that healing often begins the moment the false self starts to collapse. The masks become too exhausting to maintain. The persona starts cracking under its own weight. The life someone has built around emotional avoidance stops feeling sustainable, and eventually the psyche demands integration. In simpler words, a person just gets tired of pretending, and I believe something inside this person is getting tired too. Tired of resisting what they actually feel, tired of acting unaffected when they're clearly not, tired of carrying around everything left unsaid, tired of the constant internal war. That doesn't mean everything resolves overnight. Not at all. But it does mean that movement has genuinely begun. Something is shifting. Something inside them is softening, even if slowly. And if you've felt strange emotional intensity lately, if your intuition keeps quietly telling you something is changing, you might not be imagining it at all. Because sometimes, before any outward communication actually happens, inner movement begins first. Energy shifts before words ever do. The heart changes before behavior manages to catch up with it. That's exactly why emotionally intuitive people so often sense these transitions early, before there's any obvious external sign. You may feel restlessness, strange dreams, unexpected emotional waves, strong thoughts about them without any obvious trigger. And no, this doesn't mean you should abandon your own discernment or ignore reality in favor of a feeling. It simply means that inner bonds often communicate in subtle ways long before the external world reflects any of it. But there's one final truth you need to hear right now, and this one isn't about them at all. It's about you. Because while we've spent all this time discussing their inner messages, their fears, their silence, and their internal struggle, none of it should ever cause you to abandon yourself in the process. Read that again and really let it land. Their confusion is not your responsibility to fix. Their fear is not yours to heal on their behalf. Their emotional growth cannot be carried on the back of your own suffering. Love does not require you to disappear in order to make room for it. And this might genuinely be the deepest lesson this entire connection came here to teach you, not just how deeply you're capable of loving someone, but how deeply you can stay connected to yourself while doing it. That's sacred. Because so many people, especially the ones who love sincerely and deeply, make one particular mistake over and over. They confuse waiting with devotion. They confuse abandoning themselves with loyalty. They believe enduring endless uncertainty somehow proves the depth of their love. But healthy love was never supposed to require you to bleed just to stay connected to someone. Real love expands your dignity. It doesn't repeatedly chip away at it. And perhaps this whole connection also awakened something inside you personally. Perhaps it forced you to confront your own attachment wounds, your own fear of losing a connection, your own tendency to overextend yourself emotionally, your own pattern of giving so much more than you ever receive back. If that's true for you, then this connection served a real purpose, regardless of how it ultimately turns out. It revealed exactly where your own healing is still needed. It taught you boundaries. It taught you discernment. It taught you emotional sovereignty. And that matters enormously because the strongest position you can hold right now isn't obsession, isn't chasing, isn't collapsing into uncertainty. It's grounded openness, a quiet inner stance that says, I honor what I feel. I don't deny that this connection is real, but I also refuse to abandon myself while waiting for someone else to finally choose courage. That kind of energy changes everything. Because the moment you stop operating out of fear, your clarity increases dramatically. You stop begging for scraps of attention. You stop overinterpreting every tiny signal that comes your way. You stop carrying both sides of the emotional weight all on your own. And something powerful happens as a result. You become emotionally available without becoming emotionally dependent on the outcome. That's maturity, that's healing, that's real strength. And strangely enough, that's often the exact energy that creates the biggest shift in the other person too, because the moment your own energy stabilizes, their usual defenses lose one of their favorite tools, the ability to keep you emotionally trapped in ongoing uncertainty. Now they have to actually face themselves. Now they have to choose, move forward, or remain stuck in fear. And that choice belongs entirely to them, not to you. Which brings us back around to the three truths. The first truth, they think about you far more than you'll ever know. The second truth, they're honestly shocked by how deeply you affect them emotionally. And the third truth, they can no longer pretend this connection means nothing at all. But maybe the most important message today didn't actually come from them. Maybe it came through this whole experience for you. And that message is simply this. You do not need to force what is meant to be real. You do not need to chase after someone who is fully capable of choosing you on their own. You do not need to shrink yourself down just to make love possible. If this person is truly meant to meet you in genuine love, the truth will eventually demand courage from them. Not fantasy, not emotional breadcrumbs, actual courage. Because meaningful connection cannot survive forever hidden in silence. At some point, love asks to become real, and if they answer that call, wonderful. If they don't, that truth protects you too, because clarity, even painful clarity, is kinder in the long run than endless confusion ever could be. So if you needed some kind of confirmation today, let this be it. You are not crazy for feeling this depth. You are not foolish for sensing something unspoken beneath the surface. You are not imagining the emotional tension between you. Something real was genuinely felt. Something meaningful actually happened. And whether this person eventually returns with honesty or whether life quietly guides you somewhere else entirely, don't forget this. The love you're looking for was never meant to leave you chronically confused. The right connection may challenge you, transform you, and expose old wounds you didn't even know were there, but it will also move steadily toward truth. And so should you. Tonight, instead of only asking what they feel, ask yourself something equally powerful. What do you deserve? What kind of love actually honors your heart? What kind of presence feels safe, real, and genuinely emotionally available? Because the moment you start living from those questions instead, everything begins to change. And maybe that's exactly why you were meant to hear all of this today. Not merely to understand their silence, but to understand your own worth inside of it. Because no matter what they ultimately choose, you remain worthy of deep, honest, emotionally mature love, the kind that doesn't hide forever, the kind that doesn't fear truth forever, the kind that actually chooses. And if this person truly is your path, their fear will not stay stronger than the truth forever. Sooner or later, the heart demands honesty. Sooner or later, masks fall away. Sooner or later, what's real asks to be spoken out loud. Until then, protect your peace, honor your intuition. Trust what actions reveal, and never forget that the deepest love isn't the one that keeps you lost in longing. The deepest love is the one that finally meets you in truth.